Okay, welcome to another episode of our parenting series. And today we are talking to a former school counselor. And the whole general theme is we want to hear from a counselor of what kids are going through in school, what's going through their minds, how are they dealing with life, the pressures, how they feel towards their parents, the whole nine things that children may never say to you, but they would confide in someone, more so they feel comfortable with who is a third party to the situation. And I thought Kandra Knowles, who is a current PhD student, like I said, former counselor, has also done field work with at-risk youth, would be the perfect person to kind of share this perspective because even outside of work or, being involved with children, you've always been the type of person where young people confide in, whether it was youth ministry, you would find that people would confide in you. And so I felt like maybe it's good to kind of pick your brain to see what are kids going through? What are they not telling us? What is it that we need to understand from their perspective in order to be better parents? Even if we just have toddlers today, we're going to find what is it that we need to know and prepare ourselves for. So before we jump into that, I would love for you to, dig a little deeper into who you are and your work. Some interesting things about you, and then we'll hop right
in. Okay, I'll do my best. I love the introduction. Thank you so much, Demi. I've known you for many years. I'd say I'd start first with my passion for mental health. It stemmed from being in school, being in high school, and seeing the struggles of teens, being a teen, friends, and just knowing that the way that youth were received, for me, couldn't be the way that they would always be received if I had anything to do with it. So for the last 10 years, I feel like a lot of my work has been around children and youth development, and that has ranged from being at home in Nassau to primarily New York State. And I've done that with migrant families, and I've done that here in the city in the New York public schools. I've also done that with Boston public schools. I go to a camp during the summers that service at-risk Boston youth. And so that ranges from kids that have just mild behavioral issues to psychosis. And I don't know why, but I just love it because I feel like I'm being supportive, I'm being an asset. And I realize as a result of that I've been able to help educators and administrators and parents, so I'm happy to be here, be able to understand a little bit more their role in the lives of the next generation. So that's just passion.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you can hop right in and I'll be all ears.
So I guess I wanted to start with, two sides. A lot of adults already are aware of the challenges that their children face and that adolescents face. So a lot of things I think I'm going to share on that front, a lot of parents and adults are not surprised about. And then secondly, I'll probably go into the parent-child relationship. And for me, that is the key solution. Relationships for me are the solution to a lot of problems. And so for parents and adults, the solution is their relationship with their child and their teen. A lot of the challenges stem from a sense of identity, a sense of self, a sense of self-confidence. And that ranges from many different issues that children face. So at times I like to find out what demographic I'm working with, or find out what age group parents have more concerned about, because what children face is sometimes a little bit different from what teens face, but a common thread is relationships for them. So being around their peers is a big factor, whether they're 12 or 16. And so fitting in, that sense of belonging, that is a big driving force with how they perform in school, how they perform at home, and also their sense of confidence to be who they are, their God-given self. One thing I would also say is that we pressure a lot of our children and kids to figure out early what they want their goals to be for the future. So that also challenges their development in a way that they don't quite understand because they're not always sure of that path. And they shouldn't be expected to understand what their goals for the future would be. But being forced to answer this question at an early age also brings about challenges to identity, sense of self, and confidence. So some of the challenges that parents and children kind of faced in their relationship is a sense of disconnection. So that disconnection, I mean, we already know this too, is communication. All relationships, whether it be a marriage or whether it be just your coworkers at work, if communication is missing, the listening skills are not enhanced, then the relationship suffers. So in terms of parent-child relationship, that disconnection is one aspect because of communication. And then the second thing I would say is unmet expectations. So on both sides. Unfortunately, children and teens have unrealistic expectations of their parents. And I'd love to go more into that later too. And then on the other side, parents sometimes have unrealistic expectations of their children and teens. We're all human, and because we don't communicate as effectively as we should with each other, our expectations of each other sometimes bring about problems because they're not communicated effectively. So those are like two different aspects that I've seen in terms of children and with adults. What I find is a big solution or a big bridge builder is when adults are more vulnerable, trust is built. And one thing it's hard for adults to be is vulnerable. Because once you have that status of an adult, it's much easier for whatever you say to go, especially if you're dealing with your child, your nephew, with a godchild. But when adults practice that vulnerability, trust is built, and children trust you a lot more. There's a fear within a lot of parents that I've seen, and they don't realize when their fear kicks in until there's a problem, and they end up saying things in their language, in their actions, that can also impact the development of teens and children. So the listening to understand versus listening to respond becomes a factor. It becomes a big factor. So vulnerability for parents is something that I've learned that when parents are able to shift and be a little bit more transparent and open with their children, it really helps with the relationship. And then it also helps like their children and teens to be a little bit more confident in who they are because they've seen their parents also be vulnerable and transparent about who they are or their mistakes or things that they're currently experiencing. And so holistic development on both children's side and adult side is something I push for. I realized early in my career it was hard for parents to give me trust because they were looking at me as someone that had no idea. But over time, when they realized that I could get more out of their child than they could, advice I would give to them in terms of their marriage, in terms of who they were really more receptive to. And when I shared with them their need to work on who they are and how that would be a pivotal point to their children being more open with them, it shifted the dynamics. So I'm always a big advocate of holistic growth. So I know for parents, they push the academic side in a school setting for their children, but when they're looking at the spiritual, the physical, their children advance a lot more. And on the other side, when parents are actually growing themselves in all aspects, you see the development of their children in a greater light, much greater light. So vulnerability is one key link that I think is often missing and is something that I like to share and advocate for to help bridge just a gap between parent-child relationships. But I'll let you ask me a few questions and see if I can answer some of them.
Unmet expectations that a child would have towards their parent. Because, there's certain ages, different age periods. I remember like around the time my mom passed away, adult relationships weren't that important to me, like how they would have been when I was younger. Although obviously it was still very traumatic, but around that time, like 11, 12, I, was more into my friends. And my expectation from my parents was just like, you know where I'm going, so you should have no problem with that. Just let me chill with my friends. And so I remember that being a theme throughout, like, even through high school, just let me have fun. And I think we love to say that, like, let me have fun, let me have fun. And so I never really, like, at that age, I remember in particular at like age 12, 11, my parents weren't really people. They weren't really the true figures like they were when I was younger, like, oh, mommy, daddy, writing cards and stuff like that. They were just, people in the background, with my friends took the forefront. So just, elaborating on that, what these unmet expectations are, or were.
Yeah. So I do private work with families too. So I'll give an example. So one family that I do work with, they're teen. They struggle with their parents not understanding them, right? Not understanding them. And I share with her from time to time that, your parents say and do stuff and you get upset. But you have to realize that your parents are also human. So I'm going to give another example. We see it at work. There are adults that act very petty. And so for, let's say, a teen, for them, they can't understand, why is my parent being petty? And so when we have a conversation and we break it down, we're like, okay, do you see how your friends can be petty when their feelings get hurt? Well, surprise, adults do the same thing. But they do it under the guise of being an adult or a parent. So when you're able to break down with a teen that adults can be childish, then the way that they engage with the adults or parents are sometimes different. So they expect adults to be mature. They expect adults to be level-headed. They expect adults to have the answers. But when you're in discussion with teens and you're helping them understand that adults are human and the same things they see their friends and they themselves do, adults do as well. So once they can realize, okay, this person in my life is also human, they have mistakes, they have flaws, and they're at times going to be childish because they have this power, then the way that they process disappointment within their parents is very different. So that's one thing. Just like, I thought petty adults was one thing that I've seen that kids sometimes need to realize as well.
Yeah, definitely. Teachers, I see that a lot in the youth ministry. They have expectations of their teachers and they let them down. Context of a husband and wife relationship.
Exactly.
And a lot of people think respect is conditional. If you do X, then I give you respect. And I see, with young people, they don't feel that their teachers deserve respect if they act in a petty way. They automatically think they don't deserve any respect from me. But, generations before didn't grow up that way. They had the idea, I guess it was different too. Maybe teachers weren't as petty, maybe they were a bit more mature themselves. But there was this concept of kind of a view into why that's different for this, younger people today. Like, why is it that they feel that respect, I don't owe you respect?
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes it's bad because I agree with sometimes what kids and teens do. And I'll tell you how I've approached it. When teachers have come to me and share that their student is being disrespectful, I oftentimes, in a mature way or in a very savvy way, speak with the teacher about how they engage with the student. And oftentimes, when you hear multiple students, even the best or the high achievers in the class, say the same thing about the teacher, and you can have a conversation with the teacher about how they engage with their disrespectful student, they do end up getting the respect that they said that they weren't getting. So I don't always side with the adults. And sometimes the outcome that the adults want and the teens want are more fruitful when we do actually have a conversation with the adult as well. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
No, I think that makes sense because, we are the ones who are expected to be emotionally mature. And if we kind of operate in a certain way, you can see behavioral shifts. And the whole concept of right part is we focus on our personal development. So I'm not focusing on what my husband is doing or what I'm not doing. I'm focusing on me and bettering me and focusing on that self-work. And in doing so, and focusing on me, I'm getting the results that I want. And you described that perfectly in the context of this relationship between a teacher and a child. And I want to shift gears and I want to talk about like sex. So I'm thinking like if parents are trying to navigate the scene, there's a lot of mixed information out there. When do you think is the right time to time this conversation? And should it be phased, like, okay, this is your body part, or should you go all in at a particular age and be like, okay, this is all you need to know, this is why you should wait or not wait, and if you're gonna have protection or not, etc.
Yeah.
So when do you feel like, number one, do you feel like the conversation should be phased, first identifying the body parts, making sure you're not abused, nobody touching you, or like what age conversation about sex?
I think as young as possible, children should be having the conversation with parents. When you say phase, I would say tailored because it varies. So from 12, there are kids taking nudes and sending to each other. So if that conversation, if they're able to understand and have a conversation about what a body part is, have the conversation about what sex is. How it shifts is that at 12, it'll be conversation about nudes, right? Sometimes oral sex and what's going on in school. But for my 16, 17, 18-year-olds, we know that there's a stronger emotional attachment also involved because the developmental stage that they're at is very pivotal. So I've also talked about, and this is something that was shared with me, and I wish it was shared with me when I was younger, talking about soul ties. So I know my approach to sex education is different from a lot of persons at home, which is fine. But the way I approach sex education with teen girls and with the teen boys is from that perspective of soul ties, so that the spiritual aspect is still brought in, even though they kind of ignore that for a period of their development, and they can still understand the emotional connection. So I would say it's tailored based on development. So 10, 11, 12, you could see like cracks and body parts. But by the time like 16 comes about, that emotional side is very strong. And the struggle between what their parents teach them about abstinence becomes very real.
I can remember being in primary school and people would be like, they'd cut the hole in their pockets and they'd be getting feel up in primary school. And this is before age 11, right? I knew people who were sexually active. I knew someone who was in my grade 6 class who had a sexual relationship with someone in grade 3. And the relationship was predating grade 6. It was a multi-year relationship. And so it's a whole gamut of things that go on that sometimes parents don't even want to think about. Like you have children under your roof who being molested at sleepovers and you have no idea. And I think in a behavior culture, a lot of parents are against sleepovers for this very reason. Parents who are against sleepovers, stuff still happens to their children under the same roof. But people aren't aware of the things that go on. And I know a ton of people who are exposed to pornography at 5 and 6 years old. And so how like it's so mind-boggling that the conversation is time at, when the exposure before they could understand took place so many years earlier. And like being in the school setting, and you were in a private school, but I'm sure some of the issues were the same, and especially being, in New York and dealing with adverse youth, I'm sure, combining the two experiences, you would have seen it all at this point. But nothing in terms of supporting your child's development through these things, like whether you know what's going on or not, as a parent, what kind of signs do you look for in terms of like to know abuse is happening?
Yeah.
Some parents don't want to know, some parents do know, but the parent who wants to make sure that their child develops in a great way, and hopefully those. So what kind of signs should they be looking for to say something may be going wrong with my child that they're not talking to me about?
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna take this approach because parents and adults can go online and they could look up signs of abuse, but I would take it from what I shared earlier. If adults are transparent or tailored vulnerability with their children a lot earlier, children and teens disclosing what they're feeling and going through will not be a challenge. It's when children and teens feel that there's a block between the relationship between them and their parent, that's when fear should kind of really settle in within the adult or the parent in a child's life, because we're open with people that we trust. So when you have a parent or an adult in your life you're open or you're trustworthy with, then you wouldn't necessarily have the same concerns. And then I'll also say this: parents can be as protective as they want to be. A lot of us have good parents and that are like attuned and very aware, and they know where you are and who you're with. If a teen or a child wants to hide something, it can be hid. And then two, things happen.
Yeah.
Even to the best child or the best family or the best parent that is observant. So there isn't a 100% way to prevent things. But I want to say that when that relationship is there, even if you have to heal from some type of trauma, the healing can happen in a very healthy way because the relationship is built. So it still goes back to relationship, vulnerability, and trust.
When someone is so ashamed that they were abused or molested or raped, that they don't want even though they have a good relationship with their parent, they don't want them to look at them in a certain way. So the cloud of shame is stopping them from, I guess,
that's a whole other story on sex. Because there's such a taboo around sex in and of itself that because there's a taboo around sex, there's a taboo around abuse and sexual abuse.
Yeah, that's true.
And so the only reason that shame comes is because we don't have those open conversations and we don't have that dialogue and, again, relationship. Because you can have, and this is why I said there's a conflict that teens face in our culture when it comes to what their body is feeling hormonally and what they're taught is a spiritual foundation of being a Christian. And so when that conflict comes, then that shame comes. And that shame creates a wall. And because no one ever told you, like, you don't need to be ashamed about this, but let's have a conversation about this, so that your mind and your spirit can help you overcome something that can lead you in a way where you have regrets, and you have a different conversation. But the shame comes because there's still something that needs to be broken down.
And even in talking to young adults, I find that, like you talked about, their spiritual conflict. I find that it even erodes their relationship with God, because that cloud of shame stops them from having the relationship with God that they want to have, because they feel as if, my sin is too great. It's a whole cycle of, continuing this thing. And I think it's because they don't understand how to process. Like you said, pardon?
And who's teaching? Who's teaching the process?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I try to have an open inbox policy, I call it, where you can ask me anything, and I try not to blank faces, so I don't really look at the profile so that they can tell me something and I totally forget who it was. But I mean, I feel like this is great so far, but I want to, still in this topic again, I want to pivot to dating, and obviously you dated in high school, I dated in high school. Looking back, I have different views about what I let my child date and how experience, but what do you, like, emotionally, development-wise, what stage or what age and how would it look like when you expect a child to start dating?
I know you may not like me, but my answer is gonna be it depends. I think when that every child is different, every teen is different, level of maturity is different, goals around life are different. So I think parents that are tuned to who their child is and based on the relationship, they can decide what those parameters are. So I don't think I have a one size fits all. I just have principles that should be followed for everyone to be physically and emotionally and psychologically safe. So I know persons talk about the healthy stage of group dating and um, conversating with friends so parents know who people are. And I think maybe that was helpful for my parents with me in high school. I wouldn't say what like how they navigated was right or wrong because I could always sense their fear. I could always sense my mom's fear. And again, that's like upbringing around shame of people or family members or females that she knew having kids out of wedlock. So I always felt her sense of fear. So that always drove me more to like my academic side. I don't know if that was healthy either, but I think that it depends. I think it depends on the child and the parent and the relationship.
Like looking back, I am, so it still boils down to, like you said, this communication factor. How are we dealing with the taboo topics? How are we communicating? How am I helping you to navigate, your emotions and also our relationship? What's our relationship like? How am I as a parent? How am I parenting through it? And so all of those things are good. I don't know if you want to highlight any particular situations like in school where you had no idea. Was there anything that blew your mind in terms of I had no idea that kids were going through this?
For the teacher or for me?
I mean, in general, like having children. Was there anything that ever caught you off guard? Like I had no idea that this is what kids go through, or that this could be a reality for someone.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I was caught off guard because when you're in social work or you're in especially in New York City, you see and you know a lot. But I think a lot of teachers were caught off guard with what kids do go through and what they experience. And I think why I realized I had so much of a role to play in terms of children's growth and development and teens was when I realized that there are so many adults that are so unaware. And when so many adults are just so unaware, I was like, okay, they need to understand this. And you realize when adults and parents understand what, even if it's not their kid, if you explain to them what other kids are going through or what their home situation looks like, the way they respond and react is so different. It's so different. And I know I kept stressing communication, but one thing I think is something for parents to also be aware of is that a lot of adults aren't working on themselves. So we encourage kids to be their best self and to have these, high grades and be well behaved and be so moralistic. But there are so many adults that are hurting, have addressed trauma, have children sense that. So once parents are working on themselves first, I think that's the first. Not even a parent, an adult, because you're a man or a woman before you're a parent. So that is the first key. Like you have to be very intentional about your own personal development and growth. And then I think the rest of it is sensed by your children. And that sense of wholeness, it just exudes itself. And I mean, you're very strong spiritually, so that spirit of wholeness is sensed by people when you've been working on it. So I also feel like that is a piece that's missing. People communicate with you when they feel that you are intentional about working on who you are too.
I feel like that's really good, and that's gonna blow a ton of people's minds when they hear this replay. That it really all boils down to how are you working on you? I think that's so key. How are you working on you, and how continuous is your development throughout life, and how that's impacting your child? And we know that impacts the child even in the womb. And
Yep.
I feel like we do all this work, we're in the womb to create this conducive environment, but we forget that the same thing, what we put into our bodies is still impacting them because they're
Yep.
looking at our health and they're getting nervous. You know, how we operate in our relationships is making them have anxiety, feeling that they have to be more responsible. So throughout life, the way that we operate, you know, has a big impact on our kids. I feel like that's, I mean, it's such a simple concept,
It's simple, but people
we
don't do
don't
it.
realize it.
And you have, I know your audience is a strong Christian base. And so for
Yeah.
me, I always push persons that have that foundation as a Christian. I'm like, it's nice to say it, but we don't realize truly how are we living it. And when you live it, it exudes itself. And when it exudes itself, you have to say nothing. Like your kids sense it, your kids feel it, they feel your spirit. And when your spirit is genuine and open and whole, I think a lot of challenges that kids face will be alleviated because the adults in their life are whole. But we know
They can still
ourselves,
they
we're
can
all
still
growing.
you have Sarah Jakes Roberts. She got pregnant at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
but she talks about how loving her dad was. You know, like some pastors would ashamed to have
Exactly.
for an abortion, but she had such a loving environment within her household
That's a
that
perfect
even though
example.
she fell off a little bit, like, you know, with the shame that she put on herself, the
Mm-hmm.
expectations of others that she put on herself, but throughout the course of that time, her dad was so supportive of her.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that's a message to everyone as well, that even if you do all of the right things, you continue to work on you, you can still have a slip up, but you can help your kids who are really like doing the most, for the
Mm-hmm.
lack of a better word, you know, like they are staying out late at night, they want to be, you know, smoking, they want to be drunk, they want to be flunking, they don't want to be in school, you know, the problem child. And I guess how does a parent approach this? A lot of people take the approach, I'm just gonna get on my knees, I'm gonna send them to boys and industrial school. Two pivoted options. Like, I'm gonna pray or I'm just gonna send them off, and I don't want to deal with it. Either God deal with it or let them deal with it, but not me. So what would you tell that mother who is dealing with that type of child?
Mm-hmm. I'd start with this, right? Psychoeducation is a big thing. So the presenting problem is not the real problem. So yes, it could be the staying out late, it could be the drinking, it could be the smoking, but that's not the real problem. There's something else that's fundamentally going on inside. So addressing the presenting problem never addresses the real problem. So sending them to boys or girls industrial school and then or praying about it, even if the smoking stops, the drinking stops, or staying out late stops, there's still something I mentioned before, that sense of self, identity, sense of belonging, that may not quite be together. And so other issues may occur. Sometimes the cutting happens. That's something I've experienced with my girls. Suicidality, that happens. So if I'm speaking to a mother, I would first find out what is the real problem, not the presenting problem. When you address the presenting problem, sometimes that creates more of a barrier between you and the person you want to help. It doesn't even have to be teen. You see with adults too. But if it's addressing what the real issue is, it's first kind of finding out what is the fundamental problem here. And sometimes that could be a good indicator that someone was sexually assaulted or raped or molested. For a lot of our teens, it's the pressure of kind of being around a certain crowd. But again, it boils down to sense of self, identity, self-worth, and relationships. You want to fit in, and you may not have the best home environment, or your parents may be great parents, but you guys don't talk, or the world thinks they're perfect, but you guys don't have the best relationship. So I would never recommend necessarily addressing the presenting problem, but trying to figure out what is the real problem.
Yeah, that's really good. I had a thought that escaped. Oh, in terms of kids and parents, like you mentioned the cutting issue and, you know, getting to the root. A lot of parents aren't trained to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so guidance counselor, but are there any other options in terms of getting help when they see these issues presenting themselves and they want their child to have the best help possible to really heal?
The first, if they're in a school system, I would say the guidance counselor in those school systems are supposed to have access to outside resources that they can also be able to give parents, that parents are able to reach out to. Sometimes counselors themselves reach out to outside entities to be able to say, hey, this family will be coming into you, they need help with XYZ. That happened at the school I work with. And usually that's the best way because all of our students are typically in a school, so it's best to use the guidance counselor to reach the outside entity, but sometimes parents have resources or connections and they do know places to go to. But it also has to be sometimes budget friendly or an environment that the parent feels comfortable with. But I would say using the counselor is a good first step because they can either give them the resource physically or they can make the connection happen based on what's going on for the child.
Yeah.
No problem.
So, dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time to glean from your daughter, Kandra. I thank you for her gifts of knowledge, dear God. I thank you that you have blessed her with understanding, with discernment, with wisdom, dear God. I pray that you continue to bless her as she pursues her academics and give her wisdom and understanding to use her mightily in this season and in the seasons to come. I pray that you continue to glorify yourself through her life and she continues to glean from you and use the wisdom and the outpouring and the insight from you in her work, dear God. May you bless her hands, may you bless her mind, may she never lack any good thing, dear God. I pray that you bless all of those connected to her. May you continue to open doors for her, dear God, that no man can shut. May you continue to protect her reputation. And may you rise her name up high, dear God, as a voice of wisdom, as a voice that can be broadcast. I pray that this information touches them and it blesses them and it teaches them how to pivot in their relationships, how to govern themselves accordingly, how to be great stewards of the lives, the children that you have blessed them with. I pray for change, dear God, in the way that we parent, in the way that we operate in our relationships, in our communities, in our churches, in our schools, in our dwelling places, dear God. I pray for a total shift in the way that we communicate and relate to other human beings. I pray for better communication, dear God. I pray for better understanding, for emotional intelligence, for active listening. I thank you for this word that is firm for and protected and guide us in your perfect grace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. I love the platform that you have and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Love it.
So from, after Chadwick Boseman passed away, I don't say his name wrong, even though I hear it all the time. But I promise to end every single communication speech, whatever it may be, with these words, God bless. So God bless you, because he did that all the time, and I'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.